Okay, so thank you for joining us this afternoon for the latest in our webinar series regarding real estate, the future of real estate and investment from the Saïd Business School, University of Oxford. With me today is Professor Andrew Baum, who is the Programme Director for the Oxford Real Estate Programme and a visiting fellow at the school specialising in real estate. Andrew will be known to many people in the industry. He has had a foot firmly in both camps for the last 25-30 years or so. One very much in the industry, working daily, sitting on boards at the moment, but previously founder and seller and investor in various projects and real estate firms and funds. At the same time, with one foot firmly in the academic camp, so researching the latest trends around the world, both in the capital market side and also on the user occupier side as well. Andrew is very well placed to look at the subject of PropTech, and over the last year or so has been working on a research report into PropTech 3.0. So that was released last year, and we'll be very happy to share that with you. If you haven't seen that already, we will have a link to that following this webinar. Today we will quickly go through some of the findings of that research. Should take us 20 minutes or so to go through those. There'll be an opportunity for questions then as well. If any questions occur to you as we are going through, then please put those in the question box or the chat box, which you should have on your screen, and we will address them at the end. Finally, just to say, I apologise that I realise we are a few minutes late starting this webinar. A couple of technical issues, working remotely around the place at the moment, but I think we're all good to go. So I will hand over to Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. The report actually came out earlier this year, so we're still in the...
next slide then.
Okay.
Then Sam.
Okay. So next slide, Steve, Sam, please.
It's a bit of a delay. Right.
Okay. So we're familiar with the idea that technology has been affecting the world of real estate over the last, let's say, 5 years. And the issues that have been referred to include disintermediation of the broker. They include innovation in property uses, including movements like co-working, and it also includes technology which is making buildings more energy efficient or smarter, so that we see Google Nest, smart cities, smart buildings. So they're three of the phenomena that we've observed in the last 5 years, moving technology closer to the real estate market. Next slide, Sam. The other issues that have affected the property market directly include online retailing. So every sector is being affected, but the best example of the impact of technology on direct real estate investing is the impact of online sales on the retail property market, and the particular impact of that in the US, where the market is in some sort of crisis given the oversupply of retail space in a market which is suffering a lot of online attack, and the UK, where 20% of sales are through internet sales, which makes a big impact on the P&L of a retailer. Next slide. Next slide again, Sam. So that bar chart is showing that the UK has got the highest penetration of internet sales. Those sorts of issues led to this report, which came out in May this year. Next slide, Sam. And the issues we were interested in was what is the context of this excitement about PropTech? And my hypothesis is that there are two waves of PropTech activity, and maybe a third one round the corner. And the first one took place in the late 1990s when we had the first dot-com boom. The use of the internet and email really took off in 97, 98. That led to a burst of activity in technology investment. A lot of it applied to real estate, and we had two big survivors coming out of that. A pure software company like Argus, which has been in several different ownerships since 1999, but has survived, as has CoStar, which has gobbled up many other businesses in the data business. And the seeds of online residential property sales portals like Zoopla in the UK, Zillow in the US, those seeds were sown at that time in the first dot-com boom. And we're clearly going through a second wave now. The hypothesis being that the global financial crisis gave a whole new generation a reason for skepticism about traditional ways of doing business. Why trust the finance system when it was clearly capable of creating such economic destruction? So the idea that we could do business in new ways, cutting out the middleman, coinciding with the use of the iPhone, which was introduced in 2004 and really started to take off towards the end of the decade, meant that apps that could connect lots of people with lots of properties became a natural expectation. So the concept that if you take the housing market, for example, you've got lots of houses out there, lots of people wanting to buy them or living them, and all you need is an app that connects those two things together, becomes a natural expectation, hence disintermediation of the broker. Next slide, Sam, please. The PropTech 3.0 wave is probably going to be to do with blockchain, which we'll come on to later on. So this PropTech 2.0 wave that we're going through now, which as I said, I suggested started at the end of the global financial crisis or in the middle of that, and is really reaching some sort of peak. In fact, it may even be past its peak now, where we can see big companies getting most of the funding and gobbling up smaller companies as the next wave here. Lots of different brands being created here, some of which are very well known, some of which are not so well known, but the two big brands on that slide are Airbnb and WeWork, which are tech companies because they use technology to bring together their retail market with the property objects that they are selling or offering to the market, and they're using technology in a detailed way to optimize the use of the space or the efficiency of the process whereby the space is booked. Next slide, Sam. It's worth thinking then about what is the makeup of this technology movement. Next slide, Sam. There's a lot of money been invested. We think something like, okay, we've gone 2 slides there. So just referring back to the numbers. We think that about 30 billion has been invested in PropTech investment in the last 5 years. Now we can go on to the next slide. That's about 15% of the total VC funding for a market that's 50% of global assets. So there should be more money going into this property tech movement, and I think we can see it building now. Next slide, please. Right, now we need to try to classify where this activity is going and what the types of prop tech activity are. There's clearly a construction tech movement, which is not huge, but receiving quite a lot of investment, where platforms are trying to be established to create efficient project management processes. AutoCAD, of course, was an easy early example of PropTech 1.0. And we can see more and more of that sort of activity. But if we move beyond construction technology into pure PropTech, we think there are 3 PropTech divisions, if you like. One is to do with the ownership of space, the ownership of buildings, which we can call real estate FinTech. One is to do with the use of space, which we can call shared economy. And one is to do with the operational management of space, which we can call smart buildings. So if we start with the broad FinTech movement. FinTech was established before there was a PropTech movement in the run-up to the global financial crises. We see businesses like Amazon, which you could say is a FinTech company, and in particular things like PayPal, online banking. That movement created the expectation that we could trade real estate assets more efficiently than we currently do. So real estate FinTech movement is about creating an efficient marketplace for the sale and transfer of real estate ownership. Then the shared economy, outside real estate, the sharing economy is about the shared use of, let's say, cars as an example. So Uber is a sharing economy model, as would be Zipcar. One has got ownership, one hasn't. If we move inside the property world, we see Airbnb, which is a non-ownership model, and then you see WeWork, which effectively controls the space that it's operating. So that we see shared economy moving well into real estate, and many other examples like that, including co-living space. And the smart building movement had its origins in the need to save energy. So simple things like sensors to switch lights off when you're moving out of a building, or being able to control the heating from externally by an iPhone app, are all natural developments in a world which needs to use space more and more efficiently and more energy efficient ways. And then just before we move on to the next slide, there is a big world out there of what we call exogenous tech. So tech that is being developed outside the real estate world, but which will have a huge impact on us all. And the examples that are constantly used are to do with robotics, artificial intelligence, flying cars, driverless vehicles, drone deliveries, major movements in the way in which we use technology which will change the way a city looks and behaves. Next slide, please. We, in the course of the research, we interviewed 50 people in San Francisco, Boston, London, Amsterdam, and we came across about 150 companies. And you'll see from the list on the slide that the majority of those companies are in real estate FinTech. There are many businesses which are looking at ways of improving the transfer of assets in small ways and large ways. We see quite a few sharing economy businesses and some smart buildings businesses which tend to be aligned with the bigger businesses, the engineering companies, the Siemens of the world, who need to put large amounts of investment capital into technology which is then brought to market. Whereas a lot of the real estate FinTech businesses are typical back bedroom businesses, garage businesses that can be started with very little capital. Next slide. We can move on again, I think. Next slide. So we look at the horizontals, as we call them. What do these businesses do? What they do is they either provide information, or they facilitate transactions, or they allow control in some ways, or management of buildings. So clearly in the verticals of real estate, FinTech, shared economy, smart building tech, you'd expect a lot of the smart building technology to be applied to control and management of buildings. So that's a fairly large sector of this cross section. But the majority of activity is in the real estate FinTech vertical and the transactions horizontal. So we could characterise this by taking a business like Rightmove or any local property portal which is offering residential property market for sale, which is an information site, and moving that into a transaction facilitator. So that a lot of effort is now being applied by around 40% of the companies we looked at in facilitating transactions of real estate assets, many of which are in the residential market. So the hypothesis would be that a business like Zillow or Rightmove or whatever your local portal is for offering residential property for sale converts from an information site into a transactions platform where you can trade assets. Next slide, please. We looked at data from Pitchbook, which is a VC research company, and we found around 7,000 companies globally that are operating in the PropTech space. And again, you'll see that around half of them are in the real estate FinTech area where there's a lot of activity going on. And the reason there's a lot of activity there is because the real estate market is very large. The transaction fees that are thrown off to advisors when an asset is sold are significant. And if we can increase the velocity of transactions in the real estate capital markets, then the fee take becomes significantly larger. So it becomes a self-reinforcing virtuous circle where more investment leads to more velocity of transactions, which justifies the investment in the first place. Next slide, please. So in the smart buildings, smart real estate area, we've talked about sensors controlling temperature at the lowest level of things. We talked about the Internet of Things, the connectedness of devices in houses. I think the most interesting phenomenon that we might see in this area is the connectedness of smart buildings into smart cities and the use of what is known as big data to help cities run more efficiently. And I think if we reflect, it can seem rather remarkable how inefficient cities are. There are very few places where you can use an app to tell you which roads are clogged, which roads aren't clogged, which public transport facilities are working well, what entertainment facilities are going on in any particular day, in any particular location. Cities are way behind in the way in which they work, and the opportunity for improvement through technology is manifest. Next slide, please. Then in the sharing economy sector, the picture on the left is an old-fashioned serviced office taken in 2017, it has to be said, and the right picture is a modern serviced office, or called a co-working space. So the model on the right tends to be more popular than the model on the left, although there are some lawyers who prefer the model on the left, I've found. The movement on the right, that's a photograph of a WeWork space in London. It's a popular model. It tends to replicate the buzz of a university building. It's deliberately open plan, and it's deliberately using lots of glass in internal partitions so that people can see other people in the building. And the idea is that I think that people stimulate each other to activity. You'll see on a WeWork office, you'll see TV screens that show pictures of people who were in the building at the time and what they do, so that you can facilitate introductions between people and create connectivity. So that my consulting business operates out of WeWork space in London. Next door is the IBM blockchain team. That's extremely helpful. We go and knock on the door and ask them what's going on, and that stimulates all sorts of activity. Next slide, please, Steve. Sam. So the next slide will show the FinTech sector. Next slide coming up, I hope. Real estate FinTech is really about two things. It's about online trading of real estate assets. The ideal model would be a world in which we can raise capital through an app, through a crowdfunding app, a peer-to-peer lending app. We can offer properties for sale on this app. They might be residential, they might be commercial. We might be able to buy a share in an office building online. And the transaction would be effected online through a smart contract. And which is where we start to drift into this concept of blockchain, which is a mysterious idea to many. It's a way of securing data in a way that can't be overwritten, so that secure files can be attached to physical objects. And the physical objects that I have in mind are, number one, human beings, so that our health records should be contained in secure files that follow us around, and we can give access to those files to people that need to see that data. So a doctor might need to see my health records, and rather than have all those records scattered all over the place, there's one place, one secure place where you can find that data. Same thing would be about the sale of a car, for example, the entire ownership history and so on, and then naturally buildings. So what information would we like to put into a secure file that describes a building? Let's talk about the original architect's plans, the service routes, the plan layouts, the leases, the ownership records, the land registry information, covenants, anything that affects the right to own that building should be in a secure file somewhere. Now once we go to the level of securing that information and holding that information, the transaction process should become a lot more efficient, and repetitive processes should be cut out. Next slide, please. We can imagine how, when we put all this stuff together, we can imagine how the city will start to change its shape. And, there's a lot of appetite for power. We see things like data centres emerging that need power and fibre optic networks. We can see new property types, co-working spaces. We can start to hypothesise how a good location will be, at its centre will have some co-working space with food and beverage facilities, and you can already see the way in which modern office buildings are changing their design and their perspective from single occupied blocks into spaces where there's a lot of open space on the ground floor, inviting people into co-working facilities with coffee bars to bring people into a building. And this is moving very quickly in London in particular. The attitude of the typical office owner 2 years ago is very different from the attitude today. We can see multi-purpose buildings arising as well. So we'll see living space, co-working space, flexible office space, gym space, wellness clinics, food markets, all in the same building, and that multi-purpose building will become more and more ubiquitous. Next slide, please. Co-working is part of this. There's a sort of an ongoing argument about whether the co-working movement is a fad, whether it's got short-term characteristics, or whether it's here to stay. And I think it's becoming more and more established, as I was saying before. Next slide, please. The use of big data is being explored. There are companies that are reasonably well funded that are using publicly available data. They're using web crawlers. They are using GIS, GPS to put data together in a meaningful way for property owners. We can be suspicious about some of these movements, which are clearly product driven. They're not necessarily market driven, so they don't necessarily have a use that people are screaming for. But the more and more these develop, the more and more uses will be found for this big data. One of the weaknesses in the PropTech revolution is a lack of clarity about defining the purpose of these things that can be built. But these businesses are finding their way. Next slide, please. I think we can move on to the next slide as well. I mean, the slide there is about residential estate agency. It's suggesting that 90% of all sales leads are generated by portals. So the open question is, how long will it be before the portals start to sell buildings? Why wouldn't they simply ask for bids online? Next slide, please. We see also activity in automated valuation models. So if you're a property valuer, watch out for this. There's no good reason why, particularly in the residential property market, the availability of data can't be put together with fast-moving, multiple regression models that would now be called artificial intelligence. I mean, they're just lots of computers operating models in real time. So that every time a house is sold, the data goes into the system, re-estimates the model. And a business like House Canary is aiming to value all the houses in the US to within, let's say, 2% of a potential sales price. Once that happens, mortgage providers won't need to employ appraisers. They'll simply take the number that House Canary throws out, and that will cut out a lot of delay in the house selling process. And I think the capital market FinTech movement is going to be facilitated by lots of small activities. Although, having said small, House Canary's certainly got a lot of investment behind it. Next slide, please. Blockchain is well worth exploring. There is there are a set of people out there who are promoting blockchain very hard, and there have been a couple of blockchain-enabled property transactions. The extent to which blockchain was essential in those transactions is questionable. The use of cryptocurrency also has been employed in cross-border property transactions, so that Proppy in particular has been publicising the sale of a building in Ukraine sold to a Californian tech entrepreneur who didn't visit the building, didn't go to Ukraine, simply bought the building online using blockchain as its secure information and proof of title. So this is a movement that is going to be partly hyped and partly real, and I think the storage of data and the secure use of property data is something we can expect to see putting more and more investment to bed. Next slide, please. And then the big opportunity in property to create online property trading. The current process is clearly very inefficient, and in my opinion it richly deserves to be disrupted. But there will be a regulatory and human pushback. Consumers need protection against unauthorised selling schemes. There will be a scam. Somebody will misuse this process to take money illegally. So what we don't know yet is how we can put together blockchain file technology with traditional security, so traditional consumer protection, FCA authorization, the use of the lawyer as a way of protecting yourself. So I think that's where a lot of thought has to go into putting together the traditional business format, which is giving investor protection and security, with the tremendous opportunities that blockchain technology offers in creating efficiency.